Okay, let me tell you a really quick story. So during the original run of part 8 of JoJolion, during the ending half, or basically the Wonder Review arc, a certain idea had popped up into my head once Gappy was learning Go Beyond, or access the ability that is Go Beyond. And if you know where I'm going with this, I think you'll figure it out really quick. Mamazuku Rai explains to Josuke that he has some inherent ability to spin his bubbles, and over the course of part 8, Gappy uses Go Beyond more and more, and every time it showed up, a personal question always came to me. I wonder what would happen if Gappy learned the spin proper. It also doesn't help that there is a theory saying that Mamazuku Rai might be a distant Zeppeli, as he looked like a Zeppeli kid when he was younger. So him bringing up a spin could be, well, his background knowledge of the spin, a long distant family technique that he kinda sorta knows. What would happen to his plunder bubbles and explosive bubbles on top of his Go Beyond bubbles? Would it even apply to his soft and wet and its bubbles? So on and so forth. Always imagining it in a power scaling scenario rather than a story scenario because, well, if my power scaling and theory crafting was right, there really wouldn't be a JoJolion. The only threat would be Wonder Review, honestly. And if Josuke were to make an appearance in part 9 with any of these abilities or powers, yeah, the villains are gonna need some serious help. And as time moved forward, the idea, or the what if, crept to the back of my mind. However, with Steel Ball Run coming out very soon, the idea has sprung back to the front of my mind again. So I have to ask the question, what if Gappy learned the spin proper? And after doing the research, the only way I can describe this version or hypothetical version of Gappy is the king of the logical and the illogical, an absolute freak of nature. With that being said, hello, my name is Metas.
あるかもしれない。
Walk with me. Now, to start off with the speculative power scaling of this video, I think we need to talk about the spin first and foremost, and how it can be applied to Josuke and his bubbles. Now, any object that can be spun can be spinned. Now, the biggest case of this is early Johnny from Steel Ball Run. After unlocking his spin abilities thanks to Tusk, he starts using it in a number of different ways. In minor cases, it's unpeeling apples or brushing his teeth. However, in major cases, it's cleaving off enemy limbs with his unspherical nails. For the most part, without the wrecking balls or the steel balls or a specific tool, the spin is more or less used for destructive capabilities by itself. However, applying the golden ratio on top of your spin technique allows you a greater manipulation of your environment and the physical forms of living beings. Now, depending on what tool you use, this is a bit different on a case-by-case scenario. The Zeppeli steel balls are specifically made for execution and medical purposes, while simultaneously also being used as a weapon if needed, having much more finesse than Johnny's nails ever could. There is a plethora of different examples when Gyro shows up Johnny using the spin, when strictly looking at the steel ball. And in the case for the wrecking balls, these balls are specifically made for the Royal Guardsmen of Italy, with the intended purpose of killing or destructive enhancement. However, it does have a slight manipulation of the body / medical property, as it can shut down one part of the human brain. However, that's only to help out its destructive capabilities even further. So putting up a diagram on screen, the spin or the golden rotation plus a specific object will lead to a specific result on what said object can do to the environment and living things. Some are balanced, some are specialized attackers, and others are just there for destructive force purely. So where would Josuke fall under? I believe somewhere in between the steel balls and the specific uses of Johnny and his nail bullets. I think the wrecking balls are too hyper specific in terms of combat for it to be applied to Josuke's bubbles with soft and wet. And to be a little bit more specific, I think more closely related to Johnny than anything. So you'll be seeing a lot more destructive techniques rather than body manipulation. However, it's not out of the realm of possibility until a little bit later on, similar to Johnny. So if the Josuke we saw by the end of part 8 is the Act 1 variant of him, with the plunder bubbles, the explosive bubbles, and Go Beyond, we can immediately hop into the golden rectangle, or rather the golden spin. Now, the golden spin is the perfect state of the spin and is the sole way to improve your spin drastically, if not the only way to actually get a true proper infinite spin, which the Zeppeli family strives for. Applying this mathematical ratio to your spin gives you a drastic increase in power. Looking at the differences between Act 1 and Act 2 will show you this. Johnny's Act 1 only has cleaving potential with a fast reload time. However, applying the golden spin or the golden rectangle on top of that gives him a whole host of new powers and abilities. Not only is the physical output of the bullets has increased, increased, but also its effective range, with the downside being it takes longer for the nails to grow. However, it's not wasted, as the bullets now can auto-track to your enemy, either trying to damage their body or effectively kill them in one shot by affecting their heart, thanks to the bullet holes that the bullet leaves behind, for a very short time, mind you. Now, if you think this is a pretty drastic change from cleaving off limbs, you would be entirely correct. Act 2 is so powerful that we actually never see Act 1 again after its debut, more or less becoming Johnny's default, and I think the same thing would actually apply to Josuke as well. Soften Wet's base abilities, or Act 1 here in this case, like I've said previously, are Plunder and Explosive Bubbles on top of Go Beyond. The Plunder Bubbles give Josuke and Soften Wet the ability to take away something physical from an object or person. However, this takeaway is extremely broad. Plunder has been shown to take away friction, eyesight, oxygen, temperature, fire, and a whole host of other things, and has never been stated to actually have an exact limit. The only limit being that an individual bubble can only take one individual thing. However, Josuke can use multiple bubbles at once to take away multiple different things. On the flip side of that, the explosive bubble is kind of in the name. It is an explosive bubble. Once made in contact with anything will just explode. However, it seems like Josuke can control the explosive yield of said bubble depending on the scenario. Josuke is easily starting off way better than Johnny with Act 1. So what happens if we apply the golden rotation to these bubbles? Immediately it becomes overpowered. Not only do the bubbles have a greater power and range, but I also see them having auto tracking, as they are no longer floaty and require Josuke to kind of be in a close range to actually properly use them, with the auto tracking being the new ability granted to both bubbles. So unless you're incredibly fast, something will be plundered from you. What that is up to Josuke, and that ability was already overpowered to begin with, but now it's almost near guaranteed for it to happen, as for the most part, Johnny actually lands most of his bullet shots thanks to the automatic tracking. In another case, it's Josuke just basically throwing out a grenade point blank, thanks to the explosive bubbles. I also would imagine here the explosive yield of said bubbles would also be even stronger than previous, thanks to the spin. The upgrade is great and all, however there are a few downsides, just like Tuss Act 2. While Josuke can use multiple bubbles at any given time, only 2 of them during said time can be spun, with either being both plunder, both explosive, or one of each, with Josuke having to concentrate a pretty hard long while on both bubbles while simultaneously using them. That being said though, even with these limitations or drawbacks or cons, the pros of the ability are just too great. Getting a near guaranteed double plunder, double explosion, or a mix of both definitely overpowers the possible cons. Just like Johnny with Act 2, I think Soften Wet Act 2 will actually become Josuke's default. The advantages with it are so great that I don't think he'd ever need to use Soften Wet Act 1 ever again. Now, I know you've been waiting for this one. What about Go Beyond in combination with the golden rectangle? Is it even technically, even theoretically, like I mean in terms of physics, even possible? The reason why I say that is, if you don't know, Go Beyond does not technically exist, at least in terms of physical reality. This is because all of Josuke's bubbles are actually thin lines that spin rapidly, meaning that they've always been spin related. However, with Go Beyond's bubbles in specific, these lines are so infinitely thin they do not practically exist in real space, technically reaching zero, allowing them to surpass all logic and the laws of physics. However, I think some of you are actually going to point it out, well, if it surpasses logic and the laws of physics, how could you apply one of the most logical ratios within the universe on top of something that doesn't have any logic to it? And to be fair, you are right. Even in the story multiple times before the ending, it is stated that Josuke himself can't control it. Hell, he can't even aim it until the very end. So there is some room of argument to say that maybe he can't apply the golden ratio or the golden spin to Go Beyond. However, that's until the very end of the story, where Josuke says pretty vaguely that he can control it at least somewhat, after using it multiple times over during the end of Dojolian. And the stand description does describe Go Beyond as being pure spin, or only spin, leaving us with 2 answers. On the off chance that it is truly uncontrollable thanks to its high moving spin, the only thing that you could control over it is just the approximate aim and not the true aim, meaning that no spin technique could be applied to it. However, if Josuke somehow were able to control it, and Josuke were to apply spin techniques on top of it if he knew them, I think it would be extremely busted. Applying the same logic the previous bubbles had on top of this one, which would only make sense, this bubble would gain a massive power up with virtually no downsides, as the downsides even regularly seem the same. Go Beyond Act 2 would have more power, even greater range, and the same automatic tracking ability the previous two bubbles had before, of course being very similar to Johnny and Tusk Act 2, while still being infinitely close to zero thanks to the very thin lines, allowing it to surpass all logic and the laws of physics, allowing it to cleave or make holes into opponents. Imagine here with me, an unseeable, unblockable, automatic approaching bubble that you can't defend yourself against. What the hell do you even do? Technically speaking, nothing. There would be no way to defend yourself against it, as it will just bypass any obstacle in between you and it due to its illogical nature. And even if you try to dodge it because of the auto tracking, it will just follow you until it hits or it eventually disappears. However, that might be impossible because you can't see it. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it almost would be virtually impossible. And while the drawbacks would be it would take longer to fire in between shots and would take a hell of a lot of concentration, so much that you wouldn't be able to use your other bubbles before and slightly after, the fact that it might be a near guaranteed hit makes all the cons and the inconveniences totally worth it. Hold on, I gotta fucking sneeze. There's my Go Beyond bubble. Anyway, that's only if you can apply the golden rectangle or the golden spin on top of Go Beyond, which there is argument for and against. Now, with Act 2 giving Soft and Wet a pretty substantial buff, if not broken, what about Act 3? Is it even achievable? Now, why I say that is during Part 7, the reason why Johnny is able to achieve Act 3 is because of the uniqueness of his spin. Because he has no steel ball, he is able to freely enter his bullet hole if he shoots himself with it, allowing him to gain omnidirectional movement and shoot anybody from anywhere, despite him being crippled. This technique transcends the original Zeppeli idea of the golden rectangle and the original infinity these Zeppelis were chasing after, coming from Gyro directly. But due to the uniqueness and the one-of-a-kind nature Act 3 shares with Johnny, I found it technically at first impossible to give Soft and Wet an Act 3 variant, until I reread a specific arc, that being Ozone Baby, where Josuke is shown to encapsulate himself within his own bubble. And since we already know that the bubble's already spinning, applying the golden rotation to this should, in theory, give him a Act 3, in which Josuke sits inside a larger bubble that is spinning through the golden spin, and anything that would interact with Josuke or the bubble will either get ricocheted somewhere else or start to spin into nothingness, just like Act 3 and its spiral wormholes, protecting Josuke like a shield. And if placed beforehand, that being the bubbles, Josuke can even defend himself or even attack. However, these bubbles are unspun and are just the regular ones. That's because most of his concentration is going towards the bigger bubble. Simultaneously, due to how defensive this technique is and how limiting the attacking ability is, this ability, or rather I should say act, has a time and a place, just like Act 3 does. But a little added bonus, unlike Tusk Act 3, is just like in Ozone Baby, Soft and Wet Act 3 can actually be placed on other people, defending them as well. However, Josuke would be defenseless here, as he's concentrating on his friends rather than himself. I find this almost rather fitting under the idea that everybody has their own bubble or their own personal space. So I think honestly, as a concept, this is actually something really cool, and fits perfectly in line with Josuke's bubble-based stand. And by Act 3, this is technically where everything should end normally. Without the super spin coming from a horse, this is the max power the spin can actually be utilized at, looking back at both Gyro and Johnny in Part 7. So the overview as of right now is a massive increase in a lot of offensive abilities and even some defensive ones as well, with a substantial improvement for Go Beyond if applicable. Honestly, I don't see anybody but Wonderview giving this version of Josuke a challenge. He just has so much now. Any close range stand in JoJolion gets completely mixed and beaten in a mid-range fight thanks to the new bubbles. And with any of the close range hack-based stands getting near Josuke wouldn't be even a threat thanks to Act 3. The only way you could balance this out story-wise is giving him all these new abilities towards the end of JoJolion in a hypothetical what if. But if he's learning the spin at the beginning of the story, pack it up, bro. It's over. He power creeps the entire part. And speaking about power creep, let's address the elephant in the room. The super spin, aka Act 4. Now, Act 4, or the infinite rotation, is achieved by riding a horse in tandem with the golden rectangle, allowing a super spin to be born from the horse's energy with said rectangle, allowing Tusk to evolve into Act 4 or the steel balls into Ball Breaker, and upon contact with either of these energies will result in an infinite spinning death, affecting the body, the stand, and possibly even the soul, if you think Johnny is being hyperbolic or not. This power is the upgraded version of Act 2 in every single way, but instead of the possibility of being hurt by Act 2, now evolves into a guaranteed death by Act 4. The only way to stop it is by either messing with the steel ball while it's being thrown or the shot is being fired. In a prep time case, trying to redirect or somehow cause a reversal back onto the user will also lead to their death. However, this is pretty hard to pull off, as it does require a little bit of spin knowledge and previous knowledge of Act 4 and Ball Breaker. And if not stopped beforehand, it is unblockable and will break through any defense to fully obliterate you. And the cherry on top of all of that is if there is a time-based stand user nearby, there is the chance that Ball Breaker or Tusk can move during frozen time. Genuinely, the infinite rotation has to be one of the strongest abilities in all of JoJo. It's genuinely just too overpowered. So if Josuke ever did the super spin on top of a horse, this is what you would get. Pretty anticlimactically, it would either be the bubble or soften wet, gaining the infinite rotation, allowing him to do these techniques. So on top of everything else, Josuke now can break through any defense and instantly obliterate you. But we're not done yet. If Act 2 can be applied to Go Beyond with the golden rectangle, the infinite rotation could be applied to Go Beyond as well. Only if you believe, the rotation even beforehand could be applied, like I said earlier. So how would Go Beyond look like with the infinite rotation? Well, I have two ideas here. My first one is that it looks virtually the same. However, the effect is a bit different. Upon contact with Go Beyond's infinite rotation bubble, the infinite kinetic force just kills you after it carves a hole out of any of your body parts. Just like Act 2, I think it primarily still goes for the heart, while still having its previous abilities of surpassing logic and not existing in our physical reality, allowing it to bypass any defense, similar to Act 4, if not better. With my second idea being a little bit more gruesome. You see Potential Man's dad over here? Instead of Hollow Purple doing that, it's actually Go Beyond. Once it was fired, it progressively got larger and larger until it just cleaved off a whole section of whoever Josuke was fighting beforehand, still possessing the same abilities and powers of Act 2 and the base properties of Go Beyond. Technically speaking, you don't need infinite power to kill anybody, you just need a big enough hole to do that, which Go Beyond in this case can do, being very similar to Cream or the Hand. However, to be fair, in this hypothetical scenario, in JoJolion or in the future, I highly doubt we're going to see a Josuke riding a literal horse, and if not a perfect horse, in 2011 or moving onward. So Act 4 will probably never be seen consistently if Josuke even knew it. However, though, Josuke still has access to possibly Go Beyond Act 2 and regular Act 2 and 3 in his kit if he did know the spin. So he's still extremely powerful, even without Act 4. Now, taking a step back and looking at the Gappy we have made here, yeah, in his totality, this is an insanely busted version of the character. Honestly, giving the spin to anybody is a drastic improvement, but in specific for Gappy, or Josuke, whatever you want to call him, he is ridiculously overpowered. Even if you took away some of the Go Beyond abilities and just strictly look at Act 2 and 3, he is still very, very powerful, with a lot of healthy additions to his kit. And if on the off chance that Mamazuku Rai is a Zeppeli and after part 8 ended, Josuke did a little bit of research and figured out what the spin is, thanks to the background knowledge with Go Beyond, and if he were to appear in part 9, we're either going to get some of the craziest power creep ever within the franchise, or the part 9 villains are going to need some serious help. So with that all being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me over on Patreon if you want to consider supporting me. Stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.